Great. Okay. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Matthias Roick, our speaker tonight. Matthias is currently a Marie Curie Sklodowska Fellow at the Center for the History of Renaissance Knowledge at the Polish Academy of Sciences in Warsaw. And he's working there on a project entitled Virtue and Sociability, Teaching Friendship in Early Modern Schools and Universities, 1518-1648. And before going to Warsaw, he split his time between Göttingen and Wolfenbüttel, where he was working on a project entitled The Ways of Virtue, the Etika section in Wolfenbüttel, and the history of ethics in early modern Europe. And Matthias really does specialize in this field of early modern ethics and virtue theory. In his publications, he has explored such diverse topics as animal ethics, Petrarch's moral self-fashioning, the virtue of magnificence, and the relationship between literature, collection history, and ethics. He is the author of Pontano's Virtues, Aristotelian moral and political thought. Oh, I'm sorry, I've accidentally turned off my screen here. I think I know this by heart, though. Book on Giovanni Pontano, published in 2017. And then he's recently published 2 collections also in the area of early modern history of ethics, published in 2021 and 2022. And he's recently contributed the chapter on ethics, I believe, and social relations for the Bloomsbury Cultural History of Ideas in the Renaissance, edited by Jill Cray. And tonight, the title of his lecture, which I had on my screen, which I accidentally turned off, but believe that it's to do with Hieronymus Wolf commenting on Cicero, the amicitia. And as I mentioned, tomorrow, Matthias will be giving a research training event on editing Renaissance texts in Neo-Latin, which is for our PhD students and early career fellows. So we're really delighted to have him here for this double event, 10 years after he was with us as a Zondimer fellow. So over to you, Matthias, and sorry for the technical glitch at the end. It just had to happen, right?
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you to you all for coming virtually. I'm alone in lecture room 1. There are no angry workers banging on the window so far, but we will see what happens while I read. I'm really happy about this. Sarah did a great work in organizing tonight's lecture and also tomorrow's workshop or training event. And it's always, I think I say that every single time I come to the Warburg, it feels like being home, intellectually home, and that's a very good feeling. I have prepared a PowerPoint presentation, which I will now try to start and share with you. And as Sarah, I also lost a bit of my habit. Not that I had one particularly developed, but let's see. So, and here we can also see the title. Okay. Sarah, you can see the presentation.
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay, perfect, fantastic. So the Discontents of Friendship, Hieronymus Wolf comments Cicero's De Amicitia. Okay. Cicero's dialogue on friendship, Laelius Sive de Amicitia, was among the most widely read books in pre-modern Europe. Dante Alighieri famously found consolation in it for the death of Beatrice, and many others encountered the De Amicitia in school as part of their training in Latin and in moral philosophy, shaping their understanding of friendship. Evidence of the continuing importance of the amicitia in the Renaissance is Giacomo Pontormo's portrait of 2 friends, painted in the early 1520s. Much has been said about the portrait, but I would like to focus on one aspect. One sitter is holding a sheet of paper in his hand, containing a passage transcribed from Cicero's De Amicitia. Most commentators identify the sheet of paper as a letter, but it is also possible to see it as a part of a commonplace book. The passage reads, "In short, all other objects of desire are each, for the most part, adapted to a single end: riches for spending, influence for honor, public office for reputation, pleasures for sensual enjoyment, and health for freedom from pain and full use of the bodily functions. But friendship embraces innumerable ends. Turn where you will, it is ever at your side. No barrier shuts it out, and it is never untimely and never in the way. As Alexander Nehamar has noted, the sheet of paper is actually the only clue to the fact that the two men portrayed are friends. He writes, "We know what to make of Pontormo's painting because of Cicero's text, which is not, strictly speaking, one of the portrait's visual features." While I agree with many of Nehamar's observations about friendship, I do not share his disappointment that there is no visual iconographic evidence of friendship in Pontormo's painting, but only the textual evidence of the Cicero passage. I think that this disappointment is based on a misunderstanding of the role of textual culture in the Renaissance and on an underestimation of the power of the written word. This becomes clear when we compare Pontormo's painting with another traditional representation of friendship, the typos amicitia. The typos amicitia has its own story to tell, and I'm not sure to what extent Pontormo was aware of this tradition. It is worth noting, however, that the gesture of the other sitter pointing towards the Cicero passage deliberately or inadvertently echoes the gesture of the typos amicitia, pointing towards the open heart. The heart of the allegorical representation is openly visible as a symbol of sincerity and true devotion. The bent elbow and finger, on the other hand, signify the alignment of one's feelings, the heart, with one's actions, the hand. Similarly, the gesture in the Pontormo painting seems to suggest the harmony of word and deed. The text is at the heart of the Renaissance culture of friendship. But even if we accept the fact that the Cicero passage plays a crucial role in the painting, it is not easy to contextualize it. In an excellent survey article on friendship in the Renaissance, Carolyn James and Bill Kent argue that the passage immediately following in Cicero's text is not given, but any Renaissance reader on friendship or one of the many popular digests of ancient wisdom available would have known it by heart. He who looks upon a true friend looks, as it were, upon a sort of image of himself. James and Kent are right to point to the famous saying about the friend as the other self, but it is not entirely true that this is the passage immediately following the quotation. Instead, Cicero is emphasizing the role of friendship as one of life's basic necessities and describes its advantages. While there can be no doubt about the specific connection between the friend of the other self and Pontormo's painting, the more general question is how Renaissance readers perceived of Cicero's dialogue. And one way of doing this is to look at the commentaries and textbooks on the amicitia. In these textbooks and commentaries, I would argue, there's much less fascination with the self and the other than there is in modern times, not least because of our predominant interest in subject philosophy. If this was not the main concern of those commenting, what was? This is not easy to answer, as there are many commentaries and textbooks from the 15th and 16th centuries with different purposes and different scales. Give me a second. Where's the next slide? Here. Among the first printed commentaries were those of Ogni Bene Bonsoli, a disciple of Vittorino da Feltre, and Pietro Marso. In Transalpine Europe, Erasmus considered the amicitia together with the Officiis and the Senectute worthy to be read by teachers with the young in every school and read and reread to themselves by the old, and published brief notes on these works, mostly to, as he wrote in a letter, discourage the fault-finding linguistic pedantry of certain people. The rising Protestant movement shared Erasmus's esteem for Cicero. Given that his writings, among them the Amicitia, figured prominently in the curricula of Protestant Germany, it is hardly surprising that scholars began to write new annotations, mostly for classroom use. Among more technical commentaries concentrating on dialectics and rhetoric, two works stand out. They both stem from Augsburg. One is by Sixt Birk, primarius of St. Ernest Gymnasium, and best known for his Latin school plays. Birk's commentary, published in 1544, shows the first signs of difficulty in dealing with the tense situation in Augsburg's evolving confessional dynamics. And this is all I have to say for now about Birk, but maybe we can come back to this in the discussion if there is enough time. The other commentary, perhaps the most interesting 16th century commentary on the Amicitia, is by his successor at St. Annes, Hieronymus Wolf. Wolf published his work in 1569, along a second edition of his commentary on the Officiis and other new commentaries on the Senectute, the Paradoxa Stoicorum, and the Somnium Scipionis. These were works that very often were published together in one volume. On the face of it, Wolf was not the best candidate to write on friendship. It is true that Wolf was a brilliant scholar. He had been a student of Melanchthon and Camerarius, and today he's best known as the father of Byzantine studies, having been the first to coin the name Byzantium for the Eastern Roman Empire. However, Wolf was also disappointed by the Fugger family, his former patrons, and far from being a social book person, he suffered from depression and an inherent mistrust on his fellow citizens. As he writes in his autobiography, "Many come after me with their cunning devices or deceive me with their wiles under the pretext of friendship and goodwill." Despite his position as rector of St. Ernest, Wolf appears to have withdrawn from social life. "I do not go to see anyone unless I am called or compelled to do so," he continues. "And no one comes to see me unless someone needs my help. And so, in this teeming city, in the midst of its hustle and bustle, I lead the life of an anchorite." The reclusive Wolf wrote his commentary on the Amicitia around the same time as his autobiography and dedicated it to Johann Ludwig Hafenreuter, the son of a longtime friend, Sebald Hafenreuter, his summus atque intimus amicus. Wolf was in contact with Hafenreuter throughout his life and had recently written to him inquiring about the possibility of obtaining a position in Strasbourg, as the situation in Augsburg was becoming more and more difficult. Augsburg was interconfessional, and Wolf got caught between the lines when parts of the city council introduced Luther's small catechism at St. Annes and tried to restrict the position of headmaster to Protestants only. The commentary itself reflects some of Wolf's real-life experience and shows his skepticism towards traditional views on friendship. His skepticism is that of a moralist, however. He does not question or deny the importance of friendship, but denounces the moral state of society. For him, virtue is absolutely necessary for true and sincere friendships. But like anything else in the world, virtue can be false, a mere simulation. His pessimistic attitude surfaces in several and sometimes unexpected places throughout his commentary. One good example is a long annotation concerning Laelius's reference to a certain learned man from Agrigent, Agrigentinum quidem doctum, that is Empedocles, in the Amicitia 24. While other commentators, such as Sixtus Birk, had employed the passage to illustrate Cicero's use of the decorum personae, Wolf uses the mention of Empedocles to paint a gloomy picture of contemporary society. Based on Empedocles' assertion that enmity and friendship, lis et amicitia, seem to pervade all of nature, he recognizes the ubiquity of this principle, reaching from God and his opponent, the devil, to the planets that rotate in contrary directions, to the animal world in which stronger beasts overpower and devour the weaker ones. Then he adds, the same happens also in the case of humankind. The shrewdest and strongest prey on the weakness and artlessness of the others, sometimes even without drawing any advantage from it. Advantage, I say, rather they inflict injury on the others, putting them into danger and hardship. And while they do so, they celebrate themselves as if the thing had been well done. Every time I read this passage, I'm reminded of management. I don't know why exactly. Wolf paints a picture of a society dominated by strife rather than by friendship. Greed and the lust for power and not altruism reign. His view is one in which man is wolf to man. No pun intended. Much as in Hobbes' later political philosophy. The situation is even more problematic because of religious strife and the failures of the theologians. Sorry, I don't know why, but I lost my page. Sorry for that. So meanwhile, theologians dispute about the right view on God, on the rewards of the pious and the punishments of the impious, while they stab each other, speaking daggers in their pointed and irritating language, spreading the same illness to the minds and souls of their audiences. Can there be any doubts that this is unjust conduct? Wolf tries to hold back at this point. Temperandum est calamo, he writes, but he cannot resist to extend his criticism to the philosophers. The philosophers teach us about our duties, but all too often they themselves swerve from their duty. Hence the endless discord in matters of religion, erudition, manners, and principles. And from difference in opinions, something of little impact, we are mired in sworn enmities, ruinous insurrections, and fierce wars. Wolf describes a desperate situation in which mutual understanding is drowned out by a fierce sectarianism. Everyone sees the vices of the other and censures them, but almost no one corrects their own with the necessary seriousness and resoluteness. Only very few do so indeed, a paltry flock. If only I could count myself to them. The situation he describes obviously instills a feeling of loneliness and insecurity in Wolf. When Cicero remarks on how sweet it is to have someone with whom you may dare discuss anything, in the Amicitia 22, that is a few sentences before the citation we saw on the sheet of paper. So when he discusses the part on sharing secrets with a friend, Wolf explains at first quite reasonable. That is someone whose trustworthiness you do not doubt. So that's his advice for that. Then he goes on to suggest, however, that one should be careful with this kind of argument. Danger comes also from drunkenness, from sleep. For many who sleep blab out everything they have heard or thought about during the day, from torture, and also from mages and sorcerers' tricks. It is safest not to admit to anything that, once it spreads among people, could be a cause for shame or remorse. One can read Wolf's utterances as verging on the pathological, expressing depression and paranoia. Notwithstanding any medical condition, however, he certainly identifies one of the main problems that his own time has with the amicitia, and he's not willing to gloss it over. As is well known, Cicero defines friendship, among other things, as the most complete agreement in policy, in pursuits, and in opinions. Cicero goes so far as to state that friendship is nothing else than an accord in all things, human and divine, conjoined with mutual goodwill and affection. Wolf takes issue with Cicero's argument, commenting on the expressions all things, divine things, and human things. Regarding the contention that friendship is an agreement in all things, Wolf remarks that this is hardly possible. He reads Cicero's statement as a hyperbole, similar to construing congruency in two geometrical forms. I believe Cicero is asking too much in order to obtain enough. Wolf continues his argument. He gives the example of Cicero himself and his relationship with his brother Quintus and with Atticus. Though he was a very close friend to both, he nevertheless disagreed often and on many matters, but without hard feelings. For it is not necessary to combine difference in opinion, dissentio, with discord, dissidium. You can see that this is kind of a constant relationship that that Wolf uses, because it, if you remember in the other quotation, he also says you can kind of disagree, you have differences in opinion, but that does not mean that you really have to have a falling out. And this is always this dissentio, dissidium. The next two comments show that this is not always the case, however, so that you have a difference in opinion instead of a real discord. To a great chagrin, he writes with regard to the divine things, the experience of our times proves how powerful the agreement in religious and contested matters is when it comes to building and dissolving friendships. So powerful, indeed, that the arguments over matters of our Christian faith, de fide Christiana, seem to destroy our faith in living together, fides civilis. He then recounts the tale of the Jew and the philosopher, originating from the Secretum Secretorum. A Jew and a philosopher travel along the same road and exchange their religious views. The Jew says that he sees everyone but his fellow Jews as an enemy, while the philosopher affirms that he is bound by friendship and partnership with all human beings. Having heard this, the Jew, who is on foot, asked the philosopher, "Why don't you let me ride on your horse for a while then, so that I might regather my strength?" The philosopher agrees and gives his horse to the Jew. As soon as the Jew holds the reins in his hands, he rides away. But as divine vengeance has it, it doesn't take long and he's bucked off, and the philosopher finds him half dead by the side of the road. When the philosopher reproaches him for having wronged him, the Jew insists that he has actually done no wrong, as he's only acted upon his creed. I told you from the beginning that I do not have any inviolate community, sancta societas, with a stranger. The story appears to be a warning not to trust anyone who confesses a faith different from one's own, as Wolf writes. Some years later, other scholars would apply this rule mostly to non-Christians. In his treatise on Christian friendship, for example, the French jurist and Calvinist theologian Lambert Danon argued that true friendship can exist only between believers and Christians, inter solos fides et Christianos, guided by the spirit and the fear of God, concluding that there can be no community, societas, or common accord, consensio, of minds and souls between believer and unbeliever that deserves the name of friendship. But in the light of Wolf's complaints about his own society, the story of the Jew and the philosopher can be read in a different key too. Those who behave like the Jew in the story, acting solely upon their creed and caring only about those who belong to their own religious community, behave in a narrow-minded, unrightful way and create continuous conflict. The specter of a society without virtue and without friendship, ruled by quarrels and disputes, looms up again. To return to the beginning of my essay, Wolf has difficulty in reconciling words and deeds. The piece of paper in the hands of Pontormo's friends is of more than philological interest. It is a kind of social contract that has to be constantly negotiated. This may be one of the reasons why the two friends break the fourth wall and look at the viewer of the painting. The text is at the heart of the Renaissance culture friendship, but it requires constant understanding, a hermeneutics of the social situation. Clearly, Wolf's interests are not only philological. Unlike other authors, he does not limit himself to discussing dialectics or rhetoric. Instead, one can see how Wolf struggles with Cicero's text and tries to make it compatible with his own reality. In his case, commentary is also social commentary. He's certainly an exception in this respect, but his example shows how fruitful it can be to turn to textual forms that do not normally come to our attention. It is worth looking at the small print, so to speak, even if it is often more difficult and laborious than to settling for more accessible texts. Turning to just in these last sentences to tomorrow, can you hear me, Sarah, or you were looking like, okay. I'm almost, this is the conclusion. So this kind of work requires a set of skills, language skills, knowledge of early modern intellectual culture and book culture that are not always easy to come by. And while I do not claim to have fully mastered these skills, I look forward to discussing some of them in tomorrow's workshop. So today was the fluffy part, and tomorrow we get down to the nitty-gritty, as it were. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll stop the.
Thank you very much, Matthias. It wasn't fluffy at all. You gave us a lot of food for thought. So I'm sure there will be plenty of questions. While waiting for the next question, I do have a question for you, Matthias. It's more a question for expansion on a point that you mentioned at one point that you might come back to in the Q&A, which is the commentary by Birk. And in general, I would like you to maybe just tell us a little bit more about how unusual exactly, because you mentioned that it's Wolf's commentary is unusual in many respects, but how unusual and how does it map onto this culture of commentary in general? If you could just say a little bit more about that.
Thank you. I mean, Birk writes in the 1530s, and he's kind of in the middle of these discussions between different strands of Protestantism. He's sometimes directly involved. He's in meetings with Luther. Luther is very straightforward to him and his group, telling them that the ideas they have developed are not the right ones, and it's connected also to friendship, because the topic here is directness, sincerity, because Luther says to them, we are friends, but I have to tell you in truth that this is not all right. And I mean, Birk is very interesting because he's just to give you a dimension, it's one of these longer commentaries. It's a book in itself, and actually Birk doesn't give the text of the amicitia, but only his commentary. But within the commentary, at least I haven't really found this kind of discussions as in Wolf or Outbreaks. It's more in the preface, because he dedicates the whole commentary to the person who made him the director of the St. Anne Gymnasium in Augsburg. And there you can kind of that's something I find always very interesting. You can feel this kind of real world bubbling up through the text, and it might be exaggerated to say it shows kind of the existential dimension to get friendship right, or the concept of friendship right. But there it's still in Birk, I think it's still very much restricted to the paratext, as it were. And he tries in the text work really on rhetorical notions, and philosophical notions. He tries to bring together the friendship concept in Aristotle, the three kinds of friendship you find in Aristotle, with the text in Cicero, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And so would you say that, sorry, Lucy, I'll come right to you. So, but just to say, would you say that the social commentary dimension that you mentioned in Wolf is much more prominent than in other commentaries? Is that right? Did I understand?
Yes, exactly. At least from what I've seen so far, yes.
That's really interesting. Lucy, be able to unmute.
Yeah, thanks, Matthias, for a really interesting talk. I just wondered if we could return to this broader backdrop of the Reformation. And I think it's really interesting to think about the way that pagan ideas are helping these early modern individuals negotiate the challenges of the Reformation, religious conflict. And you touched on the issue of disagreement within amicitia. And I'm wondering if Wolf thought of Cicero as someone who can help perhaps think about schism, and whether he is pushing someone like Wolf into a kind of irenic attitude, which allows him to think about his religious opponents in a more nuanced way, or in fact, if it's pushing him further away from those he disagrees with religiously.
Thank you, Lucy. This is a difficult one. And my first, the kind of the gut reaction would be that I have the impression that I know that there's also a lot of rhetoric involved, etc. But Wolf's reaction is a very personal reaction. And the reason why I think that, and I haven't really elaborated on this, is his commentariolus, his kind of short autobiography, where this is also a very interesting document, because it has been published, edited, and translated by Helmut See in Germany. So it's also available online. It's a fascinating document because it's a whole reflection on his career, on his state of mind. It's very much connected to this. And I'm not sure to which extent this allows Wolf really, to translate this into a kind of approach or in religious matters. He's not that's my impression from what I've read of him. He's not at all a politician or someone who's able to put these things in a public forum. And you can see that he feels always under attack, like what I shortly mentioned, that they wanted to throw him out, or that they didn't want to allow Catholics to become the director of the school. But actually, to tell you the truth, I still have to dig a bit more into this background stories and what actually happened there. I know the story as he tells it in his autobiography. And I think I need more documentation. I am trying to continue to work on this, and I need more documentation to see the other side, because now I have the Wolf view, and it's very easy to simply buy his story instead of looking for the other side. Yeah.
Thanks so much. We're just so used to thinking about amicitia as an ideal of humanist networks, but of course it can then get caught up in the coils of religious conflict, and it's interesting what happens when it does so.
Yes, and this is also something very, I think we can all reconnect to in some way, because we see these, we don't see a kind of confessional struggles, but we can see, for example, adherence to different political parties, and then you have always the people who then, I don't know if you can describe it in this kind of trans-historical way, but you have always people who use these splits in society to make up their own careers and to, for example, to throw someone out they don't want any longer. So then this is, as I said, I have to follow more the historical documentation to understand the situation, but it's certainly something, that's a very good word, the coils where you get caught up, as it were, of the networks. Yeah, thank you.
So much.
Jill.
Hi, Matthias. The way I've encountered Wolf most frequently is as an editor of Epictetus, and he did the great edition of both the Enchiridion and the Discourses. And I sort of think that the Epictetan Stoic attitude towards friendship was maybe a bit closer to what he might have been sympathetic with, because it's a much more cynical view. And there's a passage in Epictetus where he says, "Haven't you thought nothing could be friendlier when you saw little dogs playing and fawning on one another, but just throw some meat in the middle and you'll know what friendship is." And that seems to me a bit closer to the kind of thing he's getting at in the commentary. Does he ever mention Epictetus, or is that a later interest of his?
Oh, I can't remember at the moment any Epictetus, but thank you so much. This is highly interesting, because I haven't looked at I've very much concentrated on Commentariolus and this the amicitia and his commentary on the Effigies. But what you quoted right now is really much more cynical than.
Cynical in the literal sense of the word, the dog-like,
in all senses.
But I basically think Wolf himself, I mean, I imagine if you're teaching in a gymnasium, you have to teach Cicero. I mean, ça va sans dire, but he was really interested in Greek material, and I think that was closer to his heart, both the Byzantine stuff and he also did the Tabula Cabetis and things like that. But it just strikes me that the Stoic view might have resonated a bit more with him. It's worth looking at anyway, perhaps.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Good to see you anyway.
Same for me.
And Matthias, I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about the reception of the work, because I believe that the frontispiece of the edition that you showed to us, I think it was a later edition, I believe, didn't bear the same date that you mentioned in the paper. I might be wrong though. Was it a second edition, or were there reprints or further editions? What was the impact of the work at the time?
Yes, I think, there was kind of an immediate reaction to it, or I think that you're right. The one that I showed is from the 70s, I think, or no, 84 or something like that. Yeah. So in the decades after the first publication, it was, I think, one of the standard works, or it was in this sense well received. I would need to look at kind of what happens in the 17th century then, kind of what happens after 1600, or this is actually a good line of questioning, because I was under the impression, working kind of on the whole line of the 16th century, that towards the end of the century you have this mostly Ramist textbooks, which kind of they explain the amicitia in a question and answer form, and they do not really allow any, let's say, critical reflection on the topic. So that would suggest that the work then was no longer much received. And I actually, from the disputations I've seen in the 17th century, not being sure if this is really the place where you would find someone like Wolf, I haven't found any mention of him. But that is kind of, you can explain that also by the fact that the disputations are mostly on Aristotle, obviously, and that they would mention Cicero only in a second moment, or a comment on Cicero to add something.
Yeah. My question was precisely because what you mentioned, the that it doesn't strike me, but I may be wrong, but it doesn't strike me as the most obvious way to teach Cicero to students. It's highly idiosyncratic, as you mentioned. It doesn't seem to be logically arranged in the same way that something like the commentary by Burks, for instance, that you mentioned, uses sort of the systematicity of Aristotle's ethics in order to understand the less systematic way of thinking about these things by Cicero. So it wouldn't strike me as the most obvious work to share Cicero with students, but as you say, it was indeed used in that way at the time, which seems interesting to me. What about the other commentaries? Were they still in use in the latter half of the 16th century, the one you mentioned before, or?
As far as I know, I mean, so first of all, just let me react to the first part of what you said. I think that both the commentary by Birk and by Wolf had this kind of mixed audience. You can see that very clearly in Birk, for example. I've left out this example, but there is right at the beginning of the amicitia, a name is mentioned, Attilius or Achillius, and it was obvious that scholars did not know in these chronologies, etc., who that person was. So what you find in Birk is, on the one hand, he first explains on a very basic school level, you can say to schoolboys, how Roman names work, which parts they have, etc. And then he goes to the discussion of this problem, and he starts, he includes in his commentary a letter to Konrad Peutinger, where he discusses this question, and where it's a very interesting letter because you can exactly see which authors he reads to try to find the solution to his problem. But to make this long story short, the point is that he treats this problem of names and name giving on two completely different levels. And this means that these commentaries would have also great value for fellow scholars. And I think the name Wolf, and as Jill mentioned, he's famous for other editions and did re-editions when he was not happy with, I think, this Platonic treatise on virtues, I think, which had been edited by another person, was rewritten by him in a long book. So he had the standing as a important Greek scholar, and I think in this sense, people who were interested in Cicero's De Amicitia would still use these comments. And you have towards the end of the century huge volumes which would combine the commentaries. Also, then there's the return of Ogni Bene, etc. So kind of this tendency that we see in a lot of fields that it becomes more scholarly, and that you have these huge compendia, as it were.
Right, that's really, really interesting. Thank you. I don't want to abuse my chair privilege. I'm asking all the questions here, so feel free to jump in again. Use the chat if you prefer, or just raise your hand, physical or virtual. Maybe Matthias, if there's anything that while people gather their thoughts that you left out of the lecture and you want to sort of expand on now, and also in light of what we've been saying so far, feel free to add.
I can, but I don't want to bore anyone. It's one thing I left out is in the beginning of this commentaries on the amicitia. I mentioned Erasmus, for example. You can see Erasmus has very, very short notes, and he's actually, just to give you an idea what discussions in these commentaries could be about, or in these annotations, Erasmus attacks Lorenzo Valla as first thing in his short commentary, because he Cicero says something along the lines, I will not use the words inquam and inquit. So I said, he said in my dialogue, because this is cumbersome and we won't do this. And then Valla, being Valla, has obviously something to say about it and says, I don't understand why Cicero says he will not use inquam, because he was not part of this conversation. And you know, the background is that Cicero hears about this conversation from his old teacher, who had been part of the discussion. So he could have not been part of this. And then Erasmus says, yeah, but this is simply a list of words that that Cicero does not want to use. So it's kind of a technical, this is exactly what Erasmus means by saying, I'm writing this short commentary just to go against people who are too technical about it, and say that use technicalities as how to say that, as quibbles or something like that. So and one line of reading, of research you can do is I'm trying, I really hope I will manage by the end of the whole project, kind of a synoptic reading of the Amicitia, that you have the Amicitia passage on the top of the page, and then you can see what, let's say, kind of what a choice of commentators said about this part, because you can really see how different their approaches can be, how they use it, and sometimes you see it's really for school use, it's for students to learn how a syllogism works, for example. The same thing about inquam inquit is then used by disciples of Melanchthon to simply show this kind of thing. And as I said, for example, Birk, the same part he uses for the same part in Cicero, where Cicero says the man from Agrigento. This is the part where Birk says, "Oh, that's interesting because Cicero obviously knows that it's Empedocles, but he can't say so in his dialogue because the fiction of the dialogue is that it's taking place in another time, that is in an older time where people had not the same knowledge of Greek philosophy as we have now, or as Cicero had." So yeah, I'm sorry, I'm getting very much into details. I don't get caught up in them, but I find it highly fascinating how these different commentaries work with the same passages, and how they really, I don't want to say struggle with them, but I always find it good to see when this movement to make the text your own, this kind of interpretation commentary thing. That seems a very simple thing, but that we sometimes tend to forget. And yeah.
No, absolutely, and this is really fascinating, and it has kind of answers my next question, which is going to be what this is part of. So you just gave us a sense of what the larger project is about, and it sounds amazing. So can't wait to see it develop further. So do we have any more questions or thoughts by the audience before we let Matthias go? Maybe not. So I guess this is it for now then. Looking forward to the pleasure of seeing you this time in person tomorrow again, Matthias. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us, and good luck with the development of the project.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone for listening and attending. Thank you.